everybody, welcome to Dirty Air. I'm your host Alex Lambert, and let's talk about NASCAR in the Irish Hills of Michigan. A major clutch win for the closer, Kevin Harvick, breaking his winless streak. A heartbreaking loss for your second place finisher, Bubba Wallace. And then, of course, a lot of guys got caught up in trouble today that coulda, shoulda, woulda won this race. Denny Hamlin, Chastain, Christopher Bell. I'm going to talk about those guys as well. Daniel Suarez. And then, of course, I want to talk about a very impressive top 10 for your youngster Ty Gibbs today at Michigan, and a wild wreck at the beginning of the race, taking out a couple of guys. There's a whole lot of action to get into. I might go a little bit long today because this is a lot of stuff to get into, but let's go ahead and get right on into it. First off, we got to talk about the closer. We got to talk about the winner of this race, Kevin Harvick. A major clutch win for this team, a major clutch win for this Ford team, shocking the playoff grid, knocking a household name, Martin Truex Jr., below the cut line. This is a serious win, and I know it puts Harvick in the playoffs, but the last driver you want to get a shot of momentum to is Kevin Harvick, because it's like Kevin Harvick said in his interview today, nobody should be doubting us, because if you're doubting us, you don't know what you're talking about, because Harvick can get on these streaks, and when he gets a win, I go back to like 2019, when he went almost the first half of the season, I believe it was over the halfway point of the season, without a win, without running up front, got a clutch win at New Hampshire, then all of a sudden was a championship favorite in 2019. That's what could potentially happen here. And I'm not saying it will with the next-gen car, obviously a lot of uncertainty, but don't count him out to be a championship contender when we go to Phoenix. I think he's very well a possible driver to get into the championship race. Hasn't been showing a whole lot of speed, but showing a lot more speed than he did at the beginning of the season. You know, we get into the summer stretch, a couple of top 10s, running up front, run up front at Pocono, even if the results didn't show it, like last week at the Indy Road Course. Still been running up front more often within the top 10, in the top 5 at times. Running decent today, had the speed, wasn't a fluke win at all. Definitely want to watch Kevin Harvick as we go into this playoffs. Could be a win. And I do want to say, this is breaking his winless streak. He's been, I think they said it was a 69 race winless streak. That's a big win too for Kevin Harvick, giving him that boost of momentum. It was cool to see his daughter ride in the car like his son did in 2018. I remember watching that race as well. It is kind of cool as a fan who's been watching for like 10 years now. Some of these guys that dominated when I first started watching, when I wasn't watching, religiously, I was kind of watching week to week. You would see him win a lot. It is kind of cool to see him to get that victory. Before you had Logano winning a whole lot of races, before you were Ryan Blaney, your Chase Elliott, your Kyle Larsons, to see a guy that won a lot back in the day to get a win is certainly cool to see. Kevin Harvick. Not a big Kevin Harvick fan, obviously a Ford guy, not my style, but it is cool to see one of those old school guys get the victory. So I am happy for Kevin Harvick to finally get that clutch win. The last win he got, by the way, was at Bristol, and this is how long it's been, was Bristol Night Race in 2020. Back when we had the limited capacity grandstands, the virus still going around. Things were a lot different before the next gen era, before Kyle Larson was back in the Cup Series. So a lot has changed since Kevin Harvick got that last win. He actually outdueled my guy, Kyle Busch, at the end of that race to get the win at the Bristol Night Race in 2020. So it's been a long time to come for Kevin Harvick. Glad to see him get that win, his 59th career win of his career today in Michigan, a track that he's fairly good at. This might be like I think this is his 6th win at Michigan. So certainly, and a couple of the races at Michigan were taken from him. So certainly good at this racetrack, and it's cool to see him get that clutch win. Let's go through the top 10 real quick. I have a lot to talk about as we go through the top 10. I just mentioned your winner, Kevin Harvick, obviously. But let's talk about Bubba Wallace, because a heartbreaking loss for Bubba Wallace today. He was super fast, and he was really hard on himself in his post-race interview, talking about how he failed the team and stuff like that. Look, take a step back and say, I think Bubba did all he could do. I don't know if he was going to be able to run those guys down. He looked at what he did negatively, but you got to move on. It's like it's the old saying I heard, blame yourself once and then move on. Don't keep blaming yourself, and I think that's what Bubba has to do. Did he make a mistake today? I'm not sure if he made a mistake on the final restart. At the time, he thought that was the right move, and it didn't work out. I don't know if another move would have worked out or not, but he didn't have the lead. It was going to be hard to get by Harvick with all the dirty air we saw today at Michigan. So I do hate that for Bubba Wallace to get a second place finish. Really rough on himself. But let's look at the last few finishes for Bubba. You have to take the positives over the negatives. Like he said, he needs to start doing more. 3rd at New Hampshire. That's a top 5 finish. Pocono, top 10. Finish in the 8th position after the first 2 got disqualified. Indy Road Course last week. A road course, a type of track that Bubba is typically shown no speed at, no results at. Got a top 5 last week, finishing 5th. Michigan today, finishing 2nd in the top 2. Not only that, he didn't just finish 2nd. He was a fast car. He might have been the fastest car of the weekend, obviously. Getting the pole, getting a 2nd place finish. Look, I know you need that win to get in the playoffs, but take the positives and run with it because that's not bad. He has not been running for wins outside of Daytona and Talladega in his entire career until this season, until right now at the second half of this year. So don't sweat it. Look at it as a positive. I think Bubba could be a threat right now to be that 16th different winner. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I think he's got a lot of work to do. But looking at the races we got coming up, especially with Daytona, a track that he's really run well at and can make the right moves at, he might be that guy, that 16th guy in the playoffs. We're going to have to continue to watch and see how that unfolds as it goes through the rest of the season. Then, of course, I want to see how he evolves going into next year as well. Denny Hamlin, heartbreaking loss for Denny Hamlin. He really might have been... He's right. He was right up there with Bubba. Might have been the fastest car. Obviously, like I said, the Toyotas were really fast today, and a Toyota didn't get the win. That's because they all kind of messed themselves up at the end. I want to kind of talk about how these guys screwed themselves at the end. Denny Hamlin could have won this race, and then got a pit road penalty. That's not his fault. That's on the team's fault. Somebody went over the double white line. That's too many men over the pit wall. That, to me, is a rule. That was, by the way, his 31st pit road penalty of this season. That's ridiculous out of, what is it? We're not even at race 26 yet. We're at race 23, 24. And to have, that's more than one penalty per race. That's ridiculous. Team's got to look back and step at that. The driver has to look back, has to take a step back and look at that. That cost Denny Hamlin a win today, and those aren't the 5 playoff points as well that could get him into a championship race. That's really a shame that he lost it the way he did. And that's a really kind of a dumb mistake to make. I mean, to just walk over the pit wall, walk over those 2 lines on pit road, you have to know that that's out of bounds for the pit crew. You can't just walk over there and pick up the tire. The tire was in bounds, wouldn't have got a penalty for that. Shouldn't have walked over there. That's a really unfortunate mistake for the driver. For him, he didn't make that mistake, but unfortunate mistake for the team. That has to be looked at, and that you can't make those mistakes in the future. At a top-tier racing level like this to get that penalty. Definitely cost him a win. Joey Logano kind of snuck up there at the end with everybody else's misfortune finishing 4th. You had Ryan Blaney finish 5th in the day, who's now racing to stay above the cut line with Martin Truex Jr. Guess who finished right behind him? The guy racing Blaney. Martin Truex Jr. finishes in the 6th position. I'll talk about the playoff grids a little bit more in just a second. Then Kyle Larson, who was also really fast, got a pit road penalty, speeding penalty, right at the end of the race, was able to come back up to 7th. A lot of penalties for some guys that could have won this race, like Kyle Larson. I look at Eric Jones, who had a lot of speed, more than he's had the last few weeks, ended up finishing 8th. Alex Bowman did not show a lot of speed at all in practice, showed no speed in qualifying, qualified in the back, qualified, I think it was row 15th or on back. So not the fastest day for Alex Bowman, was able to capitalize with a 9th place finish, capitalizing on others' misfortune. And then, of course, Ty Gibbs, who I definitely want to talk about, making his 3rd career start today, his first top 10. That's very impressive. Only his 3rd start in these super hard-to-drive next-gen cars. His 3-run streak has been really impressive. I do have it written down here. Let's see. Pocono, he finished 16th in his first ever start, got a 16th place finish. Indy Road Course last week, a road course race. Really hard to drive with the next-gen cars. Finished 17th today at Michigan, breaking in the top 10, getting a 10th place finish. That's really phenomenal, I think, for the 45 car, for that team, for Ty Gibbs to do. These next-gen cars we've shown are really difficult to drive. He hasn't wrecked one. He hasn't caused anybody else to wreck. He got a little bit aggressive today with a couple of drivers, but didn't wreck anybody. And that's impressive. To keep the car clean through these 3 weeks, to not damage anything, is a very impressive 3-race run for Ty Gibbs. I hope he races a couple more races next year. Obviously, if Kurt doesn't come back, we'll see. I would rather see Kurt come back, obviously. But if Ty Gibbs doesn't race the rest of this season next year, I would like to see him thrown in a couple of cup races, if not full-time, at least a couple of part-time races, just to see how he does, get him some of that experience in the next-gen car. He could be a real threat for winning races and championships, potentially. I don't want to, overshot it, but could be in the next few years, over the next decade or so. So we have to continue to watch him. Cool to see him run in the top 10. So that's the top 10. I do have a couple other guys I want to mention that shoulda, coulda, woulda won this race. Like I said at the beginning, Christopher Bell really could have won this race. Got tangled up with Ross Chastain. Those 2 guys obviously completely ruined their chance. That put Christopher Bell obviously out of the race with all the damage on the car. You see there, just kind of went up a little bit. I think that's on Christopher Bell. They might blame Ross Chastain just because they seem to blame Ross Chastain for everything nowadays. But Chastain was really fast today as well. Chastain and Suarez, both those Trackhouse Racing teams, and none of them even got a decent finish, which is a shame because of the caution, the untimely caution. They went down pit road a little bit earlier because Daniel Suarez didn't have as much fuel as everybody else, so they pitted just, a few laps earlier than everybody else would have with that caution coming out, with that wreck. Hurt all three of them. There were about 5 guys that could have won this race. And those were 3 that got taken out right there. Christopher Bell, Daniel Suarez, who was leading before the pit stop, and then Ross Chastain with the caution coming out, trapping both of those guys a lap down. So you had 3 of those guys take themselves out for the win. And then you had Denny Hamlin obviously give himself the penalty for the win. Then you had Bubba Wallace, who was also one of those drivers who could have won this race. Just unfortunately couldn't get quite up there. Didn't have enough laps to catch Kevin Harvick at the end. So those are the guys that, once again, could have, should have, would have won this race. They all messed up. And Kevin Harvick, the closer, was able to capitalize and get that win. Let's look at the playoff standings real quick, because we got, it's interesting. Like I said, Harvick definitely sent a shock. That moves Harvick from 17th in the playoffs, below the cut line, to a win and guaranteed in the NASCAR playoffs with that win. That puts Ryan Blaney, and I said this a few weeks ago when this kind of started tightening up a little bit. Ryan Blaney needs to be racing Truex for points in case we get another winner. Like I said, that knocked Truex, a household name, Martin Truex Jr., in the Final Four the last few seasons. As Steve Letarte likes to say, just a couple of pit stops away from being a 3 or 4-time champion, is now below the cut line in a 16-driver playoffs. If you're Truex, maybe if you're even Blaney, obviously keep points in mind, but I think you want to go for a win if you're one of those guys. I actually have Jones up there as well, 190 points out there in a must-win. Bubba's in a must-win. Almirola's in a must-win if he wants to make the playoffs. So it is interesting. We have a road course next week, or a road course in 2 weeks, Watkins Glen. We have Daytona coming up, which definitely could produce a surprise winner. And then, of course, we have Richmond next week, who could produce a surprise winner with all the strategy and stuff like that. That could definitely play a role. So definitely interesting. A lot to talk about, a lot to unload today after the Michigan race. A very interesting race to watch, a very entertaining race. Now, I do have a bone to pick. I hate to end on a negative note, but I do want to mention it before I cut the show off. Is stage racing really kind of aggravated me today, and you can agree or disagree, but with the stages today, it was kind of aggravating. The cautions come out, and it really jumbled the field up a lot. The racing today was fantastic, but it felt like you had Gibbs leading at one point. You had Logano leading at one point. You had Dillon leading at one point, where it just kind of shuffled things up. And with that result, at the very beginning of the race, you saw a caution come out that involved my guy Kyle Busch in a wreck, involved Austin Cindric, who was showing a lot of speed earlier on in the race, get caught up in a wreck. That was a bit frustrating for me to see. I don't know if you guys agree with that. It was frustrating for me to see. I didn't really like that. So with the cautions coming out, just seemed to jumble the field up, just seemed to jumble up everything. And that's just my opinion. Maybe I know some people like the stage racing, but at these tracks, at these road courses like it did last week, I feel like the stages NASCAR could look at and say, do we need these stage cautions? Because we're going to get cautions with the next-gen car. We're going to get these yellows to tighten the field up without stage cautions, without competition cautions. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at by NASCAR if we need to continue to have these stage cautions. Obviously, I like the stages. We can keep the stages. We can keep the stage points and all that. But maybe not throw a caution after the stage break. Leave a comment down below if you agree or disagree with that. But that's definitely something I would like to see NASCAR look into. I would like to see the stages go away. That's just my opinion. And we'll see what happens. Next week, like I said, Richmond. I don't know if I'll be at the Richmond race yet or not. I would like to go. I don't know if I'll be able to work things out. We'll see. So if the video's a little bit late next week, you know why, because I'm at the race. So we'll see. A strategic racetrack. Obviously Dirty Air is going to play a major role. We'll have to see how that works. It'll be hotter temperature, much hotter temperatures than we saw in the wintertime or the springtime race back in April. So there will be a difference, and we probably will be able to see that difference with this car. We're definitely able to see the difference when weather and temperatures come into play. We saw that today at Michigan with the cloud cover, so it should be fun to watch next week at Richmond, and we'll have to see what happens. That's all there is to talk about after a fantastic day in the Irish Hills of Michigan. But like I said, that's it. That's all there is to talk about. Congratulations to Kevin Harvick on his clutch win, his 59th career win, and of course about Kyle Busch getting caught up in an early race wreck on lap 25 and not even finishing the race. Let's get rowdy.